cold seeped through the threadbare knees of Alara's trousers, a familiar ache that had become a constant companion. The stone floors of the Blood Moon packhouse were unforgiving, especially in the hours before dawn when the fires had died to sullen embers. Her world was a repeating cycle of cold stone, harsh lye soap, and the biting scent of bleach that clung to her skin like a second shameful pelt. She was an omega, the lowest of the low, but even among them she was a pariah, wolfless, mute, a ghost haunting the edges of a life she was not allowed to live. Her hands, raw and chapped, worked the stiff brush back and forth, scrubbing away the mud and grime from the previous night's revelries. She kept her head down, her long, dark hair a curtain that hid her face from the world. It was safer that way. To be unseen was to be unbothered, or at least, less bothered. The pack members who passed her did so with a sneer or a deliberately placed kick of dirt onto the patch she had just cleaned. She never reacted. Sound was a luxury she had forsaken long ago, and reaction was a privilege she had never been afforded. Inside her, a strange energy thrummed, a constant, low-level vibration she had learned to suppress. It felt like chaining a hurricane inside a glass jar. Most days, it was a dull ache behind her ribs, a reminder of her own brokenness. Other times, when cruelty was sharpest, it surged like a cornered animal, and it took all her will to wrestle it back into its cage. She did not know what it was, only that it was dangerous. It was the reason she was silent. It was the reason she was alone. A sharp, deliberate impact on her back sent her sprawling. The bucket of filthy water sloshed over, soaking her thin tunic and the floor she had just meticulously cleaned. Laughter, high and cruel as shattering glass, echoed in the cavernous hall. "Look at the silent defect, swimming in her own filth," Lyra sneered. Ilara pushed herself up slowly, her body aching. Lyra, daughter of their pack's Alpha Marcus, stood over her, flanked by two of her fawning friends. Lyra was everything Ilara was not. Loud, beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, and radiating the arrogant power of her alpha bloodline. Her wolf was a source of pride, a sleek russet predator she flaunted at every opportunity. "Can't even scrub a floor properly," Lyra continued, kicking the overturned bucket. "Useless. My father should have cast you out into the Deadlands years ago." Ilara simply retrieved her brush and the bucket, her movements measured and calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears. She had learned long ago that her tears only seemed to amuse them more, like a strange and pathetic form of entertainment. She turned to go refill the bucket, her gaze fixed on the floor. Alpha Marcus himself emerged from his study, his eyes, hard as chips of flint, landing it on the scene. He looked at the mess, then at Ilara, his lip curling in disgust. He did not reprimand his daughter. He never did. "Clean this mess, Omega," he growled, his voice a low rumble of command. "And be faster about it. You are an eyesore." He turned and walked away, Lyra trailing smugly in his wake. Ilara stood for a moment, the cold of the wet floor seeping into her bones, the hurricane inside her chest rattling its cage. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing it down, suppressing it, hiding it. It was the only way to survive. Later that day, the inciting incident arrived not as a person, but as a piece of parchment. A royal courier, his clothes bearing the silver crest of the Alpha King himself, delivered a decree that sent a shockwave through the entire pack. The scroll was unfurled in the great hall by Alpha Marcus, his voice uncharacteristically subdued as he read. "By order of His Majesty, the Alpha King Kaelin the Unbroken," he announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The annual allegiance ceremony will be held here, in the Blood Moon territories, in 3 days' time. All pack members, without exception, are commanded to present themselves for inspection." A frantic murmur erupted through the assembled wolves. The Alpha King. Here. King Kaelin was a legend, a terrifying figure spoken of in hushed, fearful whispers. He had unified the warring packs through sheer apocalyptic force, his power unmatched by any living wolf. He was the alpha of alphas, a king forged in the fires of grief and war after the brutal murder of his first mate and their unborn child years ago. He was said to be as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm, his heart encased in ice. For most, it was a terrifying honor. For Lyra, it was an opportunity. Her eyes gleamed with manic ambition. She believed it was her destiny to be the one to melt the king's frozen heart, to become his queen. For Alara, it was a death sentence. All pack members, without exception. There was no hiding, no fading into the shadows. She would be forced to stand in a line, to be seen. The king's power was said to be so immense he could sense the slightest anomaly, the weakest link. He would see her for what she was, a wolfless defect, an aberration. And in the unforgiving world of werewolves, aberrations were purged. A cold, stark terror, colder than any stone floor, flooded her veins. She had 3 days until her world came to an end. The next 3 days were a blur of frenetic activity. The pack house was scrubbed, polished, and decorated until it gleamed. Every wolf was on their best behavior, a tense, false peace settling over them under the weight of the impending royal visit. Alara worked harder than anyone, her tasks doubled and tripled by a spiteful Lyra who wanted her kept out of sight. She scrubbed walls, polished silver until her fingers bled, and hauled firewood until her back screamed in protest. She worked on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of fear. On the morning of the king's arrival, she was given a clean, albeit coarse, tunic, and ordered to stand at the very back of the Omega line. She was hidden behind larger bodies, a small, trembling figure hoping to be overlooked. Then, the air changed. The temperature in the great hall dropped by 10 degrees. A pressure, immense and suffocating, descended upon them all, like the physical weight of a mountain. It pressed down, forcing many of the weaker wolves to their knees. It was power on a scale she could not have conceived, raw and absolute. He had arrived. King Kaelin strode into the hall, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He was even more intimidating than the legend suggested. Taller than any man she had ever seen, well over 6.5 feet, with a build that was pure, lethal muscle. He moved with a predator's grace, his presence dominating the cavernous space. His face was harshly handsome, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, as if carved from granite. But his eyes were what truly terrified. They were the color of molten silver, glowing with a faint internal light, and they held an ancient, chilling grief. Behind him walked his beta, a stern, efficient-looking man named Gareth, and between them, flanked by 2 hulking royal guards, was a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with his father's dark hair but a wild, haunted look in his eyes. This was Prince Valerius, the king's son, born to his second mate who had also died in childbirth. The boy was a storm of chaotic energy, his small hands clenched into fists, a low, continuous snarl rumbling in his chest. The rumors were true. The prince was feral, broken by the loss of his mother and the overwhelming power he had inherited. King Kaelin's silver eyes swept across the assembled pack, a brief, dismissive glance that still felt like a physical blow. He saw everything and nothing. His gaze was a weapon, assessing threats, cataloging power levels, finding everyone wanting. He was a man searching for something he never expected to find. Alpha Marcus bowed low, his usual arrogance completely gone, replaced by fawning subservience. "Your Majesty, the Blood Moon Pack welcomes you. We are honored by your presence." Kaelin did not reply. He simply began to walk down the lines of wolves, his inspection a silent, terrifying ordeal. As he passed, wolves bowed their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. The air crackled with his power. Alara, at the back of the line, felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The hurricane inside her was stirring, drawn by the immense power rolling off the king like heat from a forge. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force it down, to remain invisible. He was getting closer. She could smell him now. A scent of pine after a lightning storm, of cold mountain air and something else. Something uniquely powerful and male. It was intoxicating and terrifying. It called to a part of her she didn't know existed. He stopped in front of her line. Her breath hitched. The omegas in front of her were trembling, one nearly fainting from the pressure. "Please, just keep walking. Don't see me." But he did. For a single, heart-stopping second, his silver gaze cut past the others and locked directly onto hers. Time seemed to warp and slow. The noise of the hall faded away. It was just the two of them, connected by an invisible, shimmering thread. A jolt, hot and electric, shot through her, so powerful it made her gasp. It was not a gasp of air, but a silent intake of breath that felt like her soul was being pulled from her body. Inside King Kaelin's mind, a voice that was not his own, the ancient primal voice of his wolf, roared a single possessive word that shook him to his core. Mine. The scent hit him then, not faint, but a tidal wave. Winter jasmine and ozone, the scent of his fated mate. A scent he thought had died with his first love, a bond he thought the goddess would never grant him again. It was impossible. He froze, his granite composure cracking for the first time in a decade. His head snapped toward the source, the small, trembling omega at the back of the line. The one with eyes the color of a twilight sky, filled with a terror that mirrored his own shock. Alara felt the shift in his attention, the sudden manic focus of his entire being locking onto her. It was like being targeted by a god. The magnetic pull she felt intensified, a dizzying, terrifying warmth that promised both salvation and destruction. Panic, pure and primal, overwhelmed her. She did the only thing she could. She broke. Before anyone could react, before the king could take a single step, she turned and fled. She slipped through the back of the line and disappeared into the shadowed corridors of the pack house, her heart a frantic drum against the cage of her ribs. She had just run from the Alpha King. She was as good as dead. Kaelin stood frozen for a heartbeat longer, the scent of her driving his wolf into a feral frenzy. He had to find her. He had to have her. A low growl escaped his throat, a sound of pure possessive fury that made the entire pack flinch. His beta, Gareth, appeared at his side, his expression alarmed. "Your Majesty?" "Find her," Kaelin commanded, his voice a lethal whisper. "Now." But before Gareth could move, a piercing shriek ripped through the hall. It was not a sound of fear, but of pure, unrestrained power. Prince Valerius, agitated by the sudden spike in his father's volatile emotions, finally lost control. A wave of raw, chaotic energy exploded from him, a psychic tempest of a grieving child's rage. Golden light, sharp and painful, lashed out in every direction. Wolves cried out as invisible forces slammed into them. A heavy wooden chandelier swayed violently, its chains groaning under the strain. The guards who had been holding him were thrown back like dolls. The boy stood alone in the center of a swirling vortex of destructive power, his small body trembling, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, untamed light. He was a miniature apocalypse, and he was about to bring the entire hall down around them. "Control your son, Your Majesty," Alpha Marcus yelled, his face pale with terror. Kaelin was torn. His mate was out there, running, scared. His son was here, a danger to everyone, including himself. The duty of a king warred with the instinct of a male who had just found his other half. Lyra saw her chance. With a dramatic flair, she stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "Prince Valerius," she said, her voice laced with the commanding tone of her alpha bloodline. "Calm yourself. I command you to stop." It was the worst possible thing she could have done. The prince's chaotic power did not recognize her authority. It saw only a threat. A concentrated blast of energy hit Lyra square in the chest, sending her flying backward to land in a heap near her father's feet, gasping and stunned. The prince's screams intensified, and cracks began to spiderweb across the stone floor around him. Ilara had not gotten far. She had ducked into a small alcove, her body trembling uncontrollably. The king's scent was still in her nose. The feeling of his eyes on her was branded into her skin. But the prince's psychic scream of pain and fear cut through her own terror. It was a feeling she understood all too well, the feeling of a power inside you that you could not control, a power that hurt and isolated you. She heard the screams, the sounds of destruction. Something inside her, an instinct deeper and more powerful than her fear, took over. She could not explain it. She could not fight it. Her feet were moving before her mind had caught up, carrying her back toward the great hall, toward the source of the chaos. She emerged from the shadows to a scene of pandemonium. Wolves were cowering, furniture was splintering, and in the center of it all was a terrified little boy drowning in his own power. King Kalen was trying to approach, but the waves of energy were too erratic, even for him. "Stay back," Gareth shouted at her, seeing her step into the open. "Omega, get back. You'll be killed." Alpha Marcus spotted her, and his face contorted with rage. "What is that defect doing? Seize her!" But Ilara didn't hear them. Her entire being was focused on the small boy. She saw not a monster, but a child in agony. The hurricane in her own chest, the power she had suppressed for so long, was not thrashing anymore. It was humming, reaching out, resonating with the boy's pain. Ignoring the shouts and the danger, she walked forward. She stepped into the storm. The chaotic energy washed over her, but it did not harm her. It was like walking through a gale, but it recognized something in her, parting around her as if she were a rock in a raging river. She reached the epicenter of the storm and knelt before the snarling, weeping Prince Valerius. He glared at her, his eyes glowing, ready to unleash another blast. She looked into his eyes, and he saw no fear, only a deep, profound understanding. She opened her mouth. For the first time in over a decade, she willingly let a sound escape. It was not a word. It was a hum. A single, low, resonant note that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. A wave of pure, calming energy washed out from her, not with force, but with the gentle, irresistible power of a rising tide. The chaotic storm of golden light around the prince did not shatter. It dissolved. It simply ceased to be, soothed into nothingness. The psychic screaming stopped. The pressure in the hall vanished. The prince's glowing eyes faded back to their normal dark color. He stared at her, his mouth slightly open in shock. The snarl was gone, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment and a dawning, heartbreaking hope. He took a shaky step forward and whispered a single impossible word. "Mommy?" And then, the true power, the one she had unknowingly held captive her entire life, bloomed. An aura of brilliant, blinding silver-white light erupted from her, so pure and powerful it dwarfed the king's own. It was not the light of a common wolf, an alpha, or even a royal. It was the light of myth, the light of the legendary Empress Wolf, the mother of all lines, the one being whose presence could soothe, command, and unite all werewolves. The great hall was plunged into an apocalyptic silence. Every wolf, from the lowest Omega to Alpha Marcus, stared, their faces a mask of complete and utter shock. Jaws were slack. Eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and terror. This was impossible. The wolfless, mute Omega was a goddess. Lyra, who had picked herself up, looked at Alara, and her expression of shock curdled into one of horrified disbelief and pure, venomous hatred. Her entire world, her ambition, her perceived destiny, had just been annihilated by the girl she used as a doormat. King Kaelin had been frozen, watching the scene unfold, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The scent of his mate, her impossible power, the way she had calmed his untamable son with a single note. His wolf was no longer just roaring, it was singing a song of triumph and worship inside his soul. He moved. He wasn't fast. He was instantaneous, a blur of motion that defied physics. One moment he was across the hall, the next he was standing directly in front of Alara, his immense form shielding her from the prying, terrified eyes of the pack. The scent of her, that intoxicating mix of winter jasmine and ozone, was overwhelming now, a physical presence that made his knees weak with need. He looked down at her, his silver eyes blazing with a feral devotion that was more terrifying than his anger had ever been. He saw the shock and fear in her twilight eyes, the trembling of her frame as her own power, new and untamed, coursed through her. He did not bow. He did something far more profound, an act of submission no Alpha King had performed in 1,000 years. He gently took his son from where the boy was clinging to Alara's arm. Then, King Kaelin the Unbroken, the most powerful werewolf alive, knelt. He knelt on the cracked stone floor before the silent maid. He took her small, chapped hand in his large, calloused one, his touch surprisingly gentle. He lowered his proud head and pressed his lips to the back of her hand, a gesture of absolute fealty. He looked up at her. His voice, when it came, was not a command, but a vow. It was thick with emotion, shaking with a power that vibrated through the very stones of the pack house, a promise that was both a surrender and a coronation. My queen. The two words sealed the fate of everyone in the room. They shattered the old world and created a new one in a single, earth-shaking heartbeat. For a moment, absolute stillness reigned. Then, Kaelin rose to his full, intimidating height, his hand still holding Alara's as if he would never let go. He turned his gaze upon the pack, and the cold, indifferent king was gone. In his place was a male alight with the protective fury of a dragon guarding its hoard. His silver eyes promised death to any who dared to even look at his mate incorrectly. "Gareth," he commanded, his voice like grinding glaciers, "secure this hall. No one leaves. No one." His beta, his own face a mask of stunned awe, snapped to attention. "Yes, Your Majesty." He began barking orders, and the royal guards moved with lethal efficiency, blocking the exits, their faces grim. Kaelin turned back to Alara. She was still kneeling, her body trembling, her silver-white aura flickering around her like a nervous flame. He crouched before her, his expression softening into something she had never seen on any man, let alone a king. Gentle, profound concern. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. "I have you." He carefully scooped her into his arms. She was impossibly light. He held her against his chest, tucking her head beneath his chin, surrounding her with his scent, his warmth, his power. It was a possessive, protective gesture that declared to the world that she belonged to him. He strode from the great hall without a backward glance at the terrified pack, his son trailing silently and obediently behind him for the first time in his life. He carried Alara through the corridors and up the main staircase to the royal suite that had been prepared for him. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, sealing it shut behind them with a thought. He gently set her down on a plush sofa near a roaring fire. The room was the pinnacle of luxury, a world away from the cold stone floors and drafty servants' quarters she was used to. For a moment, she just stared, overwhelmed by the silks, the velvets, the sheer opulence of it all. Kaelin knelt before her again, taking her hands in his. Talk to me, he pleaded softly. Please. Alara looked at him, her throat tight with a fear born of years of forced silence. She didn't know how. The hum had been instinct. Words were dangerous. Through the nascent mate bond, a shimmering, fragile connection between their minds, she felt his earnest plea, his desperation to understand. Tentatively, she reached out not with her voice, but with her mind. I can't. It's not safe. The thought was faint, whisper thin, but to him, it was as clear as a spoken word. His eyes widened. He squeezed her hands gently. It is now. With me, you are always safe. Tell me everything. And so, she did. Through the bond, a torrent of images, feelings, and fragmented memories poured from her. The cold floors, the sneers of Lyra, and the contempt of Alpha Marcus. The constant crushing suppression of the power inside her. She showed him the incident from her childhood, a moment of childish anger where she had screamed at a dead tree, and her voice, raw and untamed, had caused it to splinter into 1,000 pieces. The fear that followed. The vow of silence she had taken to protect others from herself. The belief that she was not powerful, but broken. Cursed. Kalen absorbed it all, his expression shifting from shock to a deep, simmering rage that was apocalyptic in its intensity. The abuse his mate, his queen, had suffered at the hands of these insects. The pain and loneliness she had endured. It was unthinkable. His wolf clawed at the inside of his mind, demanding blood, demanding vengeance. They will pay, he growled, the promise a lethal vibration in the air. I will burn their entire world to ash for what they did to you. No, she sent, her thoughts surprisingly firm. Not ash, justice. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a victim, but a ruler. Her compassion, even now, was staggering. He nodded slowly, his fury banking but not diminishing, merely changing its shape. It would not be a wildfire. It would be a precise, surgical, and utterly devastating execution of his will. Justice, he agreed. He then began to speak, his voice a low, reverent murmur as he explained the truth of what she was. He told her the legend of the Empress Wolf, a being born once every 1,000 generations, a direct descendant of the moon goddess herself. The Empress was not just a leader. She was the heart of all wolf kind. Her voice could heal the sick, calm the feral, and in its full power command legions with a single word. She was not broken. She was divine. Your silence wasn't a curse, he explained, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. It was your power gestating, waiting. It was protecting you until I could find you. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. My first mate. Our bond was strong. When she died, I thought my heart had turned to stone forever. I never believed the goddess would grant me a second chance. You are not a second chance, Alara. You are a miracle. My miracle. The following day, the great hall was transformed. The festive decorations were gone. In their place, a single imposing throne had been placed on a raised dais. King Kalen led Alara to it, and for the first time, a second, slightly smaller but no less elegant throne sat beside his. He seated her there, a silent declaration of her new status. She wore a simple gown of deep blue silk, a gift from him, and her hair was unbound, cascading down her back. Her silver-white aura was a soft, steady glow around her now, calm and controlled. The entire Blood Moon pack was assembled, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. Alpha Marcus and his daughter, Lyra, were dragged before the thrones in heavy iron chains, stripped of their finery, their arrogance replaced by a stark, primal fear. Alpha Marcus of the Blood Moon pack. Kalen's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth. You stand accused of gross negligence, corruption, and the systematic abuse of a divine being under your protection, the Empress Luna, my mate. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Empress Luna. It was official. Marcus fell to his knees. Your Majesty, I did not know. She was an Omega, wolfless, a mute. How could I have known? You knew she was a member of your pack, entrusted to your care. Kalen roared, his power slamming down on the former alpha, forcing his face to the floor. You saw a young, vulnerable girl, and instead of protecting her, you and your spawn used her for your sport. You allowed her to be starved, beaten, and humiliated. You did not fail to recognize a goddess. You failed to be a wolf. He turned his blazing eyes on Lyra, who was trembling violently. And you coveted a throne you were never worthy of. You inflicted cruelty upon your queen out of petty jealousy. You are a disgrace to your bloodline, Lyra finally snapped. She's nothing, she shrieked, her voice shrill with hysteria. She's a silent freak. You can't choose her over me. I am an alpha's daughter. Before Kalen could unleash his wrath, Ilara held up a hand. The hall fell silent. She looked down at the pathetic, screaming girl who had made her life a living hell. She felt the power in her throat, no longer a chained hurricane, but a calm, deep ocean. She opened her mouth and spoke, her first word of judgment. Enough. The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of a mountain. It struck Lyra like a physical blow, silencing her instantly. The resonance of it vibrated through every wolf in the hall, a clear, unmistakable note of absolute authority. It was the voice of the Empress. Ilara looked at her mate. He watched her, his expression one of fierce pride. She gave a slight nod. He understood. For your crimes against the crown and against the goddess herself, Kalen pronounced, his voice ringing with finality. I, King Kalen, strip you, Marcus, of your alpha status and your wolf. You will live out your days as a human, exiled to the mortal lands, with nothing but the memory of the power you abused. A gut-wrenching scream tore from Marcus's throat as he felt his connection to his wolf being violently severed by the king's will. It was a fate worse than death for a werewolf. As for you, Lyra, Kalen continued, his voice dropping to a lethal calm, you will be sent to the Black Cells, a prison of silence and darkness, where you will have an eternity to reflect on what it means to be truly powerless. Lyra collapsed, sobbing, as the guards dragged her and her broken father away. The sentence was passed. Justice had been served. Ilara felt a profound sense of release, as if a chain she had carried her whole life had just shattered. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. He returned it with a fierce, possessive grin of his own. This was only the beginning. That night, the royal suite was a sanctuary of peace. Prince Valerius, now calm and content, slept soundly in an adjoining room, the proximity to Ilara's soothing aura a balm to his fractured spirit. Ilara herself felt a deep exhaustion, the emotional toll of the day finally settling upon her. Kalen watched her, his love and devotion a palpable presence in the room. He was about to suggest she rest when the shadows in the corner of the room deepened unnaturally. The air grew thick and cold, the fire in the hearth sputtering as if starved of oxygen. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A figure coalesced from the darkness, a tall, thin man in the robes of a high council member. It was Lord Valerius. No relation to the prince, a bitter irony. A wolf known for his ambition and his dabbling in forbidden magic. Your Majesty, the man said, his voice a silken, venomous whisper. A king with a new mate is a king with a new weakness. The throne requires strength, not sentiment. Forbidden shadow magic, thick and cloying, wrapped around Kalen, attempting to hold him in a stupor. It was powerful, ancient magic, designed to subdue even an alpha king. For a crucial second, it worked. His muscles locked, his movements becoming sluggish as if moving through tar. Valerius ignored the struggling king and turned his attention to Alara, a long, thin blade appearing in his hand, its edge coated with a sickly green substance. Wolfsbane concentrate, a poison lethal to any werewolf, even a king, or an empress. The pack needs a firm hand, Valerius hissed, lunging toward the sofa where Alara sat. Not a fairy tale. Alara's eyes snapped open. There was no fear. The girl who had flinched at a harsh word was gone, replaced by a queen. As the blade descended, she did not scream or cower. The power within her, the ancient knowledge of the Empress Wolf, surged to the forefront of her mind. A word bloomed on her tongue, a word from the old language of the goddess, a language she had never learned but had always known. She spoke. Shatter. The word was a command to reality itself. The poisoned blade, inches from her throat, did not just break. It disintegrated, turning into a cloud of fine metallic dust that harmlessly dissipated in the air. The same wave of power struck the shadow magic holding Kaelin. It tore apart like rotten cloth. Freed, the king's rage was a thing of apocalyptic beauty. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the castle, he launched himself at the stunned councilmen. The fight was not a fight, it was an execution. Kaelin moved with a speed and ferocity that was inhuman. He was a blur of claws and teeth, a storm of righteous fury unleashed in defense of his mate. Lord Valerius, a powerful wolf in his own right, had no defense. He was torn apart before he could even muster a second spell. When it was over, Kaelin stood panting over the remains of the traitor, his silver eyes glowing with the full, untamed power of his wolf. He turned to Alara, his chest heaving, his body still thrumming with lethal energy. He saw her sitting there, calm and untouched, her own power a serene protective cloak around her. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees before her, burying his face in her lap. He was the most powerful being on the continent, a king of kings, and in that moment, he was completely undone by his love for her, by the terror of almost losing her. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice muffled by the silk of her gown. She gently ran her fingers through his hair, the hurricane in her chest finally at peace, replaced by a deep, resonant love that echoed the one in his own heart. She leaned down and whispered her next word to him, a promise and a fact. Always. 6 months passed. The harsh winds of winter gave way to the gentle warmth of spring. The royal palace, once a place of cold grief and grim duty, was now filled with light and laughter. Queen Alara, the Empress Luna, had healed the court, not just with her divine power, but with her quiet strength and unwavering compassion. She stood on the grand balcony overlooking the capital city, a gentle breeze teasing the strands of her dark hair. She was no longer the frightened girl in rags. She wore the silver and white robes of her station, and on her shoulder, the mark of the Empress. A shimmering silver wolf howling at a crescent moon was now fully visible, a permanent testament to her identity. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. Kaelin's scent, pine and lightning, enveloped her. He was no longer the cold, haunted king. His love for her had thawed the ice around his heart, and while his power was no less immense, it was now tempered with a warmth that radiated through the kingdom. "What is my queen thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She leaned back against his solid chest, a soft smile on her lips. Her voice, once her greatest fear, was now as natural to her as breathing. It was melodic and clear, holding an undertone of her innate power, a sound that could soothe armies. "I was thinking about a girl scrubbing a cold stone floor," she said softly. "She seems like someone I knew in another lifetime." Kaelin's arms tightened around her. That girl was a diamond being crushed under rocks. She was always a queen. The world was just too blind to see it. He turned her in his arms to face him, his silver eyes full of a love so profound it still took her breath away. You saved more than just my son that day, Alara. You saved me from myself. You gave me back my soul. A small figure darted onto the balcony, laughing. Prince Valerius, no longer feral but a bright, happy child, launched himself at Alara's legs, hugging her tightly. Mother, he said, looking up at her with adoring eyes. Gareth says the bakers have made honey cakes in the shape of wolves. Can we go see? Alara laughed, a sound that was pure music. She ruffled his hair. Of course, my little wolf. Just let me have a moment with your father. The boy grinned and ran back inside, his energy vibrant and healthy. Kaelin watched him go, then looked back at Alara. Mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He chose that name for you himself. It is the greatest title I have ever been given, she replied, her own eyes shimmering. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, my empress. More than the moon loves the stars, more than life itself. And I love you, my king, she whispered. Then, now, always. He sealed the promise with a kiss, a tender, passionate meeting of lips that spoke of battles won, of a future secured, and of a love that had remade the world. They stood on the balcony, a king and his empress, two halves of a single soul finally made whole, their united power a beacon of hope for all their people. The most powerful voice in the world had not come from a king or a warrior, but from the silent girl who had been told she had none. For she had learned that true strength was not in the volume of the sound you make, but in the courage it takes to finally speak your truth. In the quietest heart, the most powerful roars can be found, waiting only for the right moment to be heard. And so, the reign of the Alpha King and his Empress Luna began, a story whispered from generation to generation, a legend of a love that healed a broken kingdom and proved that even from the deepest silence, a voice can rise to change the world. Their bond was not just a fated connection, it became the very foundation of a new golden age, an era of peace and prosperity, built on the bedrock of justice, compassion, and a love that had conquered all darkness. The silent maid was silent no more, and her song was the anthem of a thriving world. Thank you so much for joining me for this incredible story. What a journey from a silent, abused maid to the most powerful empress in the world. I hope you felt every moment of Alara's triumph and King Kaelin's devotion. It just goes to show you that a person's true worth is never defined by their circumstances. If you loved watching Alara get her justice and find her fated mate, please destroy that like button for the YouTube algorithm. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more stories just like this one. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single epic romance. Now I have a question for all of you. What was your favorite moment of Alara's power reveal? Was it when she calmed Prince Valerius with just a hum, or when she spoke that single word of judgment in the throne room? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading every single one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.